Alright, welcome back. Today I have a Japanese professional game between Fujita Akihiko and Tanaka Nobuyuki. Neither one is, terribly famous. They're respectively, I believe, white is 2 dan and black is 4 dan. So, the little bit younger professionals. And I don't know if I've done a Japanese game yet, which is long overdue if I haven't. But I just thought that this game had a lot of neat things in it, and a really good example of why you don't want to have 2 weak groups at the same time. It's not going to go well for you if your opponent has any sense of how to attack. So let's get into the game here. And pretty standard. This is nothing out of the ordinary. Black decides to approach instead of enclosing his own. It would also be fairly common, to play, p17, and close this corner facing your own stone. This would be better than doing this, because here you're making a corner enclosure as well, but the direction of this influence is along the lower side, and it's being disrupted by the white stone on the four in the lower left corner. So, just a small thing, but as in the game, it's also possible to just approach your opponent's corner and leave this for later. And white attaches, and black goes into, this could potentially turn into a large avalanche. When white extends here, you can get into some very complicated variations involving this cut, and it's basically just both sides manage to hang on by a hair, and it's a really long, complicated joseki. But another option is to just play this Atari here and build a wall facing your stone. Very straightforward. Now, a simpler option, the local joseki move here, would be to just make this tiger's mouth, and basically you've got influence, white's got a little bit of territory, pretty basic exchange. But in the game, and this is also totally playable, black makes kind of a big extension from the wall. And, this leaves some thinness, there's these cutting points, and, this is not a settled shape for these 4 stones, and we'll see white kind of try and take advantage of that in a couple moves. White starts with this, I don't know whether to call this a probe or just a reducing move, kind of hard to say. And black chooses kind of an interesting, chooses to come out with and attack it with the knight's move, which, doesn't really, especially with the stone being a line further away, is not that severe of an attack, but it's about as severe as black can get. There's still, white can attach at the 3-3, could just float away, it's like, one option would be, of course, to just jump out. But, white could just do something, maybe even this cap or something, just kind of float away. And if black does cut here, white will get forcing moves instead. So that might be an option. But a lot of times, and what we'll see is white immediately turns over to, this is maybe sort of an attack on these 4 stones. I think white is aiming at, with this stone here, this stone is attackable, and this wall is attackable, so white's just going to come in and aim right at black's weak point. But more generally, the point of this 2-space high approach is frequently if white wants to play very, very fast in the opening and approach this corner, and basically the idea being that no matter what black does, black can go here as well, white's just going to ignore and say, okay, that's cool. This stone is really just kind of a general reducing maneuver. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna defend it. I'm just gonna put it there because it'll be like a thorn in your side moving forward. So white comes, and like I said, kind of aiming for this dual attack. And of course white's thin as well, but I think white's just, trying to find a way to make a good position. Black reinforces the more important of the cutting points. I mean, I think it's easy to see that, this cutting off this stone on the second line is not as big as the cutting off the 2 stones in the center. That should be, fairly easy to pick up. A stone on the second line in the opening is not generally that important unless it's necessary for a group to live or something. And this is kind of, typical, This stone is pretty strong. I mean, it's a knight's move from here. It's a one space jump from a two-stone wall, so white attaches to it because, making black stronger here isn't really an issue. Black wedges, which was interesting, and then white goes here, and, black would like to maybe connect here instead to be able to cut and push with this, but the problem there is that white just comes like this, and now white's all connected, and there's no problems, and black has a really ugly situation here. I guess it's not too bad, because he can come out here and he's kind of connected to the outside, but this stone's in a good place to, white can even jump out and nullify all of this black thickness that black sort of has. So that plays here, which for the moment keeps the two white groups separated. White Atari's over here, black connects, white connects, black jumps out, and now this stone is getting very lonely. White comes out here, continuing to put pressure, and here white's trying to fix this cut in some sort of sente, so that you can see works. Black extends here, so now this cut is basically good, or white doesn't have to worry about it. And then white comes in to try and cut through this. And here we have an interesting situation. White would really love to just be able to capture this whole string of stones, but white's just a little thin on the outside, and you'll see. Now notice how dicey this is, because black only has 2 liberties right now. And obviously a move like this isn't working, because this is Atari, and this is just a snapback. So there are issues, I guess we could say. So when white comes here, and similarly too, I'm not sure, you may not have seen this Tsuji. This is sometimes referred to as the Stone Tomb Tsuji, which is kind of neat, is that basically white can descend here and keep black from getting more liberties or really anything going. It's kind of unfortunate, because what happens is black come like this or something like that. White can just play here, white plays here, and then again we're getting into the same situation. Now in this case I think black would just have enough liberties that he would be able to connect to the outside. Like for example, in this situation we go there, there, connect here. Okay, yeah, you can see black does sort of manage to get to the outside, but I don't think this might not even be working. White could probably capture these stones at this point. So there's no real way, at this point, for black to keep these separated. But there's all these cutting points on the outside. And this threatens this ladder, because when white comes out, this is an Atari, voila, and then bam, here we have the ladder. That's no good. So at this point, white kind of knows the game is up, but white connects here, which, does give white a fair amount of territory along the edge, and then black captures on the outside, making this a more or less equal result. This is essentially, a Panuki in the center of the board, which is proverbially worth 30 points. And this is a high, thick shape out here, and there's still some Aji in the one stone right here. Like, when white goes on, one thing to note is that black has moves like this that can be used, because now if white comes out with these stones, well, now black connects here, and these 4 white stones are in a world of hurt. They may be able to come out under severe attack, but this would be kind of a collapse for white to all of a sudden have this weak group right in here. And then if white, takes the stone off the board, well then this is an Atari. And right now it's not a big deal, because, white, at this point in the game, white would never connect here to save 3 stones in Gote. That's only 6 points. 6 points in Gote in the opening is a terrible move. But, in the middle game or something, or if there was more going on and, at some point this group had gotten surrounded and needed extra eyes, this would be a good forcing sequence. So, something to keep in mind. Instead, white goes into the 3-3 here, And this ends up kind of mirroring a 3-3 invasion Joseki off of a 4-4 point, which I'll demonstrate in a second, because basically we get into this, and now it could be, if black had started with, like, if the order of moves here could easily be, 1, 2, 3, 4, instead of in the game where, 2 and 4 were the first stones played. But, and so, a lot of these positions can kind of transpose back and forth, and so black plays this double Hane, which seems kind of crazy, but it really works basically the same as, as it would work down here, and we can just, if we want to go over this variation, now, we all know the most common variation, which is, just plays out like this, and this is the one everyone knows, but if you want to improve your game, you should look at some variations for this Joseki. Particularly, a lot of times, this will be reversed. It'll be white in a handicap game who's making this invasion. And one thing is, it's like, this is a little easygoing in a lot of ways on black, because or the invading color, because they invaded your area. You already had the first stone there, and then they got this territory, and you got this wall, but they got it in Sente, and that just seems a little easygoing to me. So another option here is this double Hane, and there's different ways that this can go. The most common, like in the game, is that this cut happens, and now black would come back to capture the stone, and here white has an option. One, they could just simply Atari to build their wall like this. And one thing, from here is that a lot of times in this situation, if we do something like this, white can break away here, or possibly, depending on the situation, maybe even at this point, although this Hane would be pretty brutal. I think white would want to play this and see how black responded. But, if black just connects here, well, white gets Sente now. So white got the wall in Sente. But another option, and this is something that not a lot of people realize, is that it's a really easy, if you want to keep this territory, like, let's say you don't really have a use for this thickness, like, just, if black had, like, a stone here and a stone here, and this wall isn't really going to be facing anything useful. One option, though, is to cut on the inside like this. Black will capture the stone, and then white can come back to capture these two, and this is, and keep the corner territory. So, you try that sometime as well. For some reason, a lot of people don't realize that it's not a given that black can take that territory away, from white when white's got a stone on the 4-4. This variation is still possible, and the downside is that, black gets this Panuki, which, isn't high in the middle of the board, but this is a really good eye shape. Like, this shape is almost never going to die. You have to get kind of like 2 or 3 moves around it to kill it, so this is basically more or less a living shape, as long as you take a little bit of care of it, and black gets this in Sente. So, it's a trade-off, but white can easily maintain the territory. But notice that there's some kind of latent Aji in these 2 black stones. The reason is that if black comes down like this, white has to come on the inside to keep them captured. Like, this would be the capturing sequence right here. So notice that, black can do sneaky things like this, and if white is distracted or isn't paying attention, then, and does something somewhere else, then when black comes down like this, all of a sudden, this is not working anymore, and black has retaken the corner. So there's some Aji there, just something to pay attention to. Another way to use this Aji, instead of coming from the bottom, is to press up like this, because if white ignores this, like, white would, often play a Hane or jump out or do something, but if white ignores this to do something else, well, now this is definitely Sente, because for the same reason, white does something else. Boom. oops, that's the end of that. So, there's kind of this, black can use that Aji kind of from either side, which is another thing to at least be aware of in the Joseki. So now that we've, just kind of glanced at some of that, we're going to see in the game is kind of similar, even though we started from a 3-4 point and a 3-3 point. So here, black connects, and, this stone wasn't here in the other variations, but the, basically black's going to come and take the corner territory. White's going to get this Panuki shape with this one stone extension in addition. And, you notice that, even with these 3 black stones here, it's still really hard to kill this. It's like white can pretty much just play, as in the game, at M17 and is alive, more or less. Like, it would take several moves to remove the eye potential from this group. So that's something, something to be said for, having this strong... The thing with the Panuki is it's got good eye potential, especially right on the edge of the board like this. So it's a good shape if you're seeking immediate safety. It's kind of hard to go wrong. So, white defends at M17, black gets Sente, and now with this enclosure, the bottom side is really big, because there's this enclosure projecting towards a 4-4 stone, which as we know is influence-oriented, so we know big extensions from the 4-4 point are good, and likewise extensions from our shimaris, our corner enclosures, are big. So it's kind of becomes real obvious that this is the hot area of the board that needs to be played in. Some might play something right on the middle, like this, which would be fine. This is kind of a style thing of, how aggressive do you want to be, because it's also playable to go one line further, and I want to point out that these are the only two, well, maybe the, let's not talk about fourth line, but on the third line, because I think this is also playable, although usually, the problem being is this kind of invites this natural counter extension, and now we're undercut, so that might not be the best, but if you were really into an influence game, I think that this would be playable, and this really would be playable as well. But let's just look at the third line for the moment, because it's a little more standard, and also I want to point out that basically only the moves at A and B, like these are the 2 moves. All other moves like C, D, E, F, all inferior. A and B are the only 2 extension moves. And like I said, we're just going to talk about the third line. I think you could easily play these on the fourth line, and the same logic would apply, essentially. And I'll show you what that is. The first is, let's say we want to be more conservative than A. What if we try playing like this? We think, okay, hey, this is going to, keep the corner like a little better, like this connection is stronger, whatever our logic is. The problem now is that, when black makes this counter extension, you see how we both made these 4-line extensions, but white played first in the area, and then they got an equal result. That's not satisfactory, and if we pull it back another line, it gets even worse. Now it's like obvious, like, whoa, black, even though white played first here, and yes, this connection is stronger than, this connection, but there's still invasion points in here, and, it's kind of, why did we hold ourselves so tightly to this? So, I hope that that's clear, that going, less far than A isn't working, but then let's talk about going further than B and what those problems are. If we go one line further than, L3, the problem here is that black will immediately pincer this stone. And pretty much there's no way for white to get a good result here. The problem being, if white doesn't have room to make a 2-space extension. So the best base that white could get would be this. But now what happens is, if black just makes a 2-space extension, we can see that the 2 black stones are working more efficiently than the 2 white stones. Like, black has more of a base, the black group is stronger, more established than the white group. White just has to kind of jump out into the center now, because there's probably not room to make two eyes on the edge of the board with the close, pincers on both sides of a one-space extension. And now it's like, well, Black could even just slide into the corner here and be like, well, you have this floating group, which I'm not going to attack it right now, but at some point I'll attack it. It's like right now I'm just taking a big chunk out of your corner. So, that this just wouldn't work. Alternatively, if White jumps out directly, again, Black can just make a base, and again, it's, White is the one that's floating in the center. So there's, you don't want to go one line further than B. But in the game, White does actually play B. And the logic of this is real simple. It leaves room for a two-space extension to O3. And that's important because Black immediately pincers, and White has to make that base. So this is kind of a good rule of thumb, is if you're looking at making a White extension, leave yourself room, for a two-space jump, just to give yourself options with your outpost stone, because, basically from here, if Black does something really mellow, I guess you would maybe call this, like this, now it's just kind of like, oh, okay, well, we'll just jump to the fourth line, and we're sketching out a really large territorial area all of a sudden. This would be too narrow for Black, so obviously a professional would play a pincer or something more active. And here you can see that, both sides kind of get to make this, two-space base on the side on their enemy's camp. But White gets to attach here, and this does a lot for the corner defense and, kind of limits the scope of this group. Because you can see that, White can still, attach down here. But, a similar attachment isn't possible for Black over on the left corner. So here, much more typical for White would be to do a one-space jump like this, mostly because we're threatening to cap at A, which is a pretty severe attack against Black. And it just kind of puts pressure, puts more pressure on the Black group than other options, like a Knight's move or something. But in this case, White does something fairly unusual and plays this diagonal move to secure the corner territory. The issue being, with the one-space jump, the invasion at B is still very possible. So the logic here is that White's going to just take a big corner quickly. And I think that this makes a fair amount of sense, because with this strong Black formation at A, this weak group down here shouldn't have too many problems, running out and making a connection here. And so it doesn't seem like this is really, White wants this group down here to be weak-ish so that it's hard to attack the two White stones severely, but White doesn't really have any ambitions of severely attacking this group. Maybe a little bit of counterattacking to make, Sabaki, to make fighting shape for the lower White group, but capturing, seriously threatening, not really, not so much. So White, interestingly, just plays a slow move, which now, this corner invasion doesn't work. This is White's territory. There's a little bit of Aji still back here, but it not likely to be enough for Black to do anything. And here, we see pretty standard maneuver against a two-space extension, which is this, building up by leaning on it. Black is building thickness towards this high stone over here at Q14, which very logical idea. And so far, so normal. A lot of times what will happen here is White will extend here to make the captured stone at M4 a definite I. And this is big because now this White group is alive. There's one I for sure on the bottom, there's one I for sure right here. Even if Black gets in this and this, we're still getting an I down here. So, actually, in this particular instance, I guess moves like this might be working. Or they might just get you a ko. It's hard to say. Is this gonna work? Oh, see, this doesn't even work. So, yeah, in any event. So this white group is definitely alive after this extension, but again, this would mean that black would get to build up in Sente, and then I think after a black move like here, man, this just really consolidates the right side. It's a lot of territory. It's going to be very hard to invade in here too, because you have all this thickness staring down at it. So that would be a tricky situation. So white leaves this as is, which it's dicey because the problem is that black can do this, and even if white does capture the one stone, this is obviously not an eye now. And there's only one eye, one definite eye on the lower side, so this group is going to have to move out to the center now, and you can see that there's not a lot of scope to do that. But also, check out, white's move here. This is the same as when we were looking at the Joseki earlier. If black does, just is like, oh, what, I'm going to capture that stone. Well, again, now this is a collapse for black. Black just lost these 3 stones, this whole corner, these stones are weak now. So this is kind of, white's being a little, activating that Aji. And so, black has to block to, keep that sequence from working. And then white jumps over to here to establish a position on the right-hand side. And I guess white was looking at it and figured this was probably the best way to sort of get in over here. I mean, it's the widest area on the right. He's got this forcing move he got over here at S14. This can maybe run out to the center. But again, one of the problems with this is that in order to get this group going over here, white had to leave this group without 2 definite eyes. And like I said at the beginning, this is a good example, this game is a good example of why not to have 2 weak groups at the same time. And we're going to see exactly why that is. So first of all, black comes here to destroy the eye shape of the white group. White plays a forcing move, which again, if white can follow this up, that would be probably enough to get 2 eyes. But or in this case, white has this sequence, but white needs another move, obviously, for this to work. Otherwise, black can just capture at P2. And yeah, this is kind of on a knife's edge right here. So, again, white leans over this side. First leans this way, then leans this way, and then black gets time to come back and says, alright, bam, I'm coming right in here. I don't want you to have any sort of base or eyes. I want you floating. And so this is interesting. White pushes a couple times, which is good. It's like if your opponent's going to willingly crawl on the second line, you might as well make them do that a few times. And then jumps out with a 2-space jump. And, black just is playing real simply, just like, okay, this group is alive already, you're not going to connect to it. I'm just letting you know right now. White jumps out again, and there's not really much that white can do at this point, and man, it's just like black stones everywhere. This would be scary. I would be scared if I were white. And then black plays this, which is really sharp because this is looking at the the potential to cut through at A through this 2-space jump, and with the close stones at B and C, a move at A is certainly possible. So white has to defend somehow and does it by attaching back here. And again, just does a little bit of pressing, but black is just like, you're not gonna connect. I'm not gonna let you connect. And then this is kind of neat too, because white has to come back and make sure that this group is going to get 2 eyes one way or the other, which lets black again is kind of just poking in at this connection and making sure there's no eye shape or anything. And here, it finally makes use of this. Now the stone could come out, so white has to go back and capture it. And now when black plays this, it's really the eyes. Where are white's eyes on the bottom? So now it's really easy to see that the A group and the B group are both floating, and it's really hard for white to handle this situation, especially considering that both players are professionals, and professionals are really good at this type of thing. It's like when they've got you on the ropes of just continuing to apply pressure. White has kind of a neat sequence here. plays this double hane, comes back, black comes back, threatening to capture, and white would love to come out with this stone, but that's not playable because white's so weak in here. And so white comes out over with this group. And black, Atari's here, and this stone at A, this is really important. This is it's very useful for stopping the connection between the B and the C group. So you can kind of see that, every time black gets a move against the lower group, the upper group gets in more and more in trouble. And then this move is just poking out the eye shape. Like, white has to connect in a really ugly way here. And there's no way to make eyes, right around. If we could see if white could get a move in, at A, instead of letting black get that move, then, there would be an eye in here, but probably not, because there's this push through at A, both A and B are sort of me-eye in this situation for black to rob white of the eye shape. So, and then, black just reinforces the outside, saying, okay, you're certainly not getting through to any of your living groups up here now. I made sure of that. White has to come out as best they can. And here, white's trying to keep it on both sides. And here, white's plan with coming out with this stone is pretty obvious. Is to capture the A and B stones and get two eyes that way, since it's not looking like there's going to be any on the side at this point. That's a good idea, to try. But black just keeps applying the pressure. And here we can see that, these groups are reaching towards each other. And so even, like, if we go back a ways, and this is what you want to do when your opponent has two weak groups. And this started all the way back here, when black, dropped this, bomb in white's lines, behind white's lines, just kind of taking away all the eye potential on the edge. Is that, right now, this A stone and the B group, they're not that close to each other. It'd be hard to find a move that attacked both. But if we accelerate, like 20 moves or so, till we get to here, we can see that these groups are, like, consistently moving towards each other now. They're kind of, like, flowing towards the same point on the board, which is, like, around B, is, like, where the groups are moving towards. And, from here on, it's really obvious that these moves that black is playing are attacking both groups. And that's why it's just so hard to have two weak groups on the board, is that eventually your opponent will chase them towards each other, and then they'll be able to play moves that attack both at the same time. And that's just, it's really, this is kind of funny, because it's like, even though the stone's an Atari back here, this is still an Atari on the 4 white stones. It's kind of funny. So, white captures back here, and then black just extends to come through. And notice that, now it's like, even if white pushes at A, black can Atari, at B. So these stones are still kind of in a shortage of liberties. And at this point, it's really, white's probably looking for a place to resign, because it's pretty clear that the A group doesn't have any eyes, and is just, like, this stone's an Atari over here, so, like, this black shape on the bottom is really thick, and then this is really thick. There's just very little room to counterattack here. Black even comes back and gets to protect this one cutting point. White can still Atari here, but it's not accomplishing too much. It comes up to make sure that this bottom group lives, but now, black gets another move against the top group, and it doesn't seem like there's any way. So here, white's like, well, maybe I can connect over here, and black's like, no. And then white's like, well, maybe I can make eyes over here, and black's like, no. So, this is kind of, sometimes we'll hear that phrase, looking for a place to resign, and it's like, white's just gonna try. I mean, you've got to try. It's like, well, especially if you're a professional, you're not just going to roll over and die. You've got to see, if there's something here. But, black plays this move, which is just kind of really clamps down on any eye-making potential, and this is kind of neat. Goes into this situation where it's kind of like we got into a crosscut, and black just Atari'd both times, which is normally not what you do. Normally, it's like when you're in a crosscut, you just want to extend. You don't want to Atari your opponent's stones. But here, black is so thick, black just does this to just, like, cut these in two and be like, well, what are you going to do now? And, white plays this cut, and then white cuts over here, black extends, and, white's just kind of like, is there anything for me? Is there anything for me? And here, we get to this point, and actually, is that? Okay, yeah. And, I think white cuts here, and white's like, well, maybe I can work something out, but black instead just extends here, and then when white captures the two stones down here, and, this white group's already alive now. There's no way for black to kill it, really, because it's, yeah, no way for black to kill it. So losing these two stones isn't so big if we make sure that this big dragon at A dies. And that's what this does. And so at this point, white realizes, there really is no more hope for the group at A. It's just dead, and resigns the game. So that's kind of an example of, why you don't want two weak groups. Even if one of them, like this one on the bottom, was mostly alive through most of that sequence, just having a situation where your opponent can threaten one group to build up power to attack the other group is a really painful one to be in. And that's why, we put a lot of emphasis on only having one, and ideally don't have any. Don't don't live that close to the edge. It's like, or maybe you like your Go exciting and you like to run around rescuing weak groups, in which case that's your own style, go for it. But, for the most part, it's like, try not to have any weak groups, because then if you do realize, if you have no weak groups and you're counting mid-game, and you realize that you're behind by like 15 points and you're going to have to like invade a big moyo or territorial framework, then you can do it because you don't have any weak groups on the board. If you've been, husbanding this one weak group through the game, just thinking, oh, well, I don't have two weak groups, I just have the one, so I should be fine, I'm not going to worry about it. Then the issue with that is that, if you get into that same situation, it's like, oh man, I really need to, invade this moyo, but it's like, oh, but I already have this weak group, that's going to be really hard, because then I'll have two. The weak groups limit your strategic flexibility in so many ways that you want to play as solid as possible, unless you need to make a weak group to accomplish something, in which case go for it. But just something to think about. Well, that should do it for this time. I hope you enjoyed that, and thank you for watching.